Chapter 10 Elders. Despite Trevor's threats to have him carried if he slowed too much, his escort seemed content to match whatever pace CJ hobbled at. And with so much of the toxin still sapping his strength, the pace he set was not a quick one. Trevor walked to his left, keeping just out of arm's reach on that side. Another guard mirrored his motions on the right, and two more flanked CJ as they crossed the infirmary floor. As he moved past bed after bed, CJ gasped at the scale of this room. It was twice as long as a basketball court and perhaps half as wide to give the healers plenty of walking space between patients. His slippers made almost no noise as he stepped across the stonework beneath. Or if he did make any noise, it was drowned out by the synchronized footfalls of his escorts. When CJ glanced up, he found each chandelier firmly mounted to an archway that matched the contours of the ceiling. Every bed he saw was unoccupied, as it seemed the patients all had their curtains drawn. When he looked down the corridor, he saw their immediate destination. The exit from the infirmary was the biggest door he'd ever seen. It was as tall as a man and half again, and wide enough for two people to walk shoulder to shoulder through it. As it rose higher, the door arched inward until the two sides met at a point. But the thing that really captured his gaze was the intricate carving all across it. The bright, almost white wood didn't look painted, and the entire thing was inlaid with a scarlet metal that matched the shawls of the healers. Is everything in this place so fancy? But even that was only enough to hold his attention for a moment before he returned to studying the floor as they shambled along. If he didn't, his gaze would be drawn to all the pairs of eyes watching him and his guards as they left. Many of the healers had stopped their duties, if only for a moment, to witness the spectacle. Apparently, this didn't happen every day. The other reason he kept his eyes down was to avoid the glow that kept radiating from those around him. When he'd first awoken in the infirmary, the glowing outline was only there if he'd stared for long enough. Now, though, even glancing at a person was enough to catch a glimpse of a faint, colored shimmer around them. And if he so much as turned to face them, the glow would sharpen to perfect clarity. But he knew it was a hallucination by the fact that the glow seemed to give off no light. Even the solar stones above reflected off the slightly glistening stonework underfoot. The different colors around the people, however, were absent, just like the ones surrounding the people back home. As they neared the massive door, the soldier to his right stretched his stride. By the time CJ and the other three reached it, he had already tugged it wide open and was holding it aloft. Trevor fell in line with CJ, and the other two soldiers behind him closed the distance between them to fit through the wide opening without breaking stride. As they stepped through the doorway, CJ found three guards flanking it on either side. They wore the same sort of clothes as those guarding him, but they sported bits of armor as well. Their chest plates looked too thin to hinder any weapon brought against them, though he guessed that was deceptive. The metal plating of their greaves only had a minimal gap at the knees to allow for greater mobility. But even the guards didn't hold his attention for long. The hallway he'd entered was somehow more extravagant than the room he'd left behind. The ceiling was at least 10 feet tall, and the walls had enough space between them to allow four people to walk shoulder to shoulder without brushing the stone. Regular support beams added sturdiness to the structure, turning to arches where they kissed the brickwork overhead. And the floor underfoot was almost perfectly white stone bricks. But what held them together was what captivated his eye. At first glance, it looked as though polished gold was the mortar, but when the light caught it just right, the space between the large bricks glowed like molten lava. The light itself came from the large lanterns hanging between the support arches, warm light dispensing any shadow throughout the halls. Keep going, Trevor said, though his voice didn't sound as firm as the other times. At least the man seemed to understand CJ's reaction to the space before him. CJ fell in step with his entourage, hobbling down the hall while he tried not to gawk. As he moved, he could almost feel the gaze of the flanking soldiers on his back. But whenever he risked a glance over his shoulder, their eyes were straightforward and burdened with purpose. Neither of them talked either. The man on CJ's right only ever spoke to indicate which way to go. A right at this junction, left down that hallway, up those stairs. After the fifth turn and third staircase, CJ was convinced of at least one thing. If left to his own devices, he'd be stuck wandering these castle halls for days. Every corridor shared the beautiful appearance of the one before, foiling any attempts he made to distinguish them. For all he knew, the guard had been leading them in a circle for the past 10 minutes. While the two guards behind were silent and the man on the right spoke only when necessary, Trevor talked enough for all of them. The man's mouth hadn't stopped moving since they left the infirmary. When you are before the council, you will treat them with due respect. That is, tenfold what you exhibited yesterday. You will speak only when spoken to. Answer every question quickly and truthfully. Don't bother trying to lie, they'll know. If you have any of your snide comments in mind, keep them there. You will not prefer what'll happen should you let them loose. CJ had half a mind to shut out the guy's constant rambling, but he also had half a reason to listen. If being in the Elder's good graces meant they'd tell him how to get home, he'd be a saint during the meeting. but Trevor's quote-unquote advice extended far beyond how he should talk. CJ also needed to stand up straight, look the speaker in the eye, and was supposed to bow when he entered their chamber. That last one made the idea of being a saint a little further from reach. He also was not to address any of them by name, even if he knew it. Each of them was to be referred to as elder or sir. Nothing more, nothing less. Everything he said made CJ's next struggling step shakier than the last. The lack of any emotion in the soldier's tone left no room for argument. He very clearly held them in high regard and would accept nothing less even from an outsider. The idea left a sour taste in CJ's mouth, but he set his jaw. It wasn't for them. It was just to get home. Eventually, the wait to reach them came to a close. CJ and his escorts, still in perfect formation, rounded a bend and he saw a short corridor that ended in a pair of massive double doors. 10 guards, all glowing different faint colors, stood with their backs to the walls, about arm's length from each other. These soldiers were outfitted even more than those at the infirmary. The silver armor covering much of their persons was trimmed in gold, and they stood pencil straight at their posts. In addition to the swords at their hips, all the guards clutched a halberd that reached well above their heads. Their eyes never so much as glanced at the approaching party. They just stared forward, giving CJ the impression of springs coiled, energy just waiting to be released should the need arise. CJ's entourage disbanded as they neared the doors, leaving only Trevor by his side. All the others found their spots alongside those stationed at the walls. The pair of pearl white double doors stood tall before him, not 10 feet away. Gold trimming wrapped and swirled in ornate patterns that beckoned the eye. But then the sight was blocked from view as the pair of soldiers closest to the entrance stepped in front of them. Their halberds crossed, barring Trevor and CJ from proceeding any further. Suddenly, CJ eyed the other guards more suspiciously. The hallway was not cramped by any means, but the soldiers behind them would only need to take a couple steps before he and Trevor were completely surrounded. The heads of those halberds looked a little sharper now. "Speak your business," one of the soldiers said. It wasn't curt or cold, but his voice was still commanding. "The elders instructed that this boy be brought before them for inspection. The request was to be fulfilled as soon as he was fit to leave the infirmary. The child is now able-bodied enough to stand before them." Trevor glanced over at the crutch CJ leaned on. "Just barely." With a nod, the halberds uncrossed and the soldiers each took a door in hand to ease it open. CJ released a breath he didn't know he'd been holding, glancing at the guards behind him before he followed Trevor. The chamber beyond, CJ wasn't sure what else to call it, was a massive circular room. The walls around him all flowed upward into the dome overhead. Light came from unseen sources, flooding the room. The floor beneath him had to be marble, polished so fine that he saw a cloudy reflection of himself when he peered down. Pillars, 10 of them, spaced symmetrically around the expanse, hid some of it from view. Around the center of the chamber, 11 high-backed thrones sat on a semicircle platform raised a couple steps above the rest of the floor. All the chairs faced the very center of the room, and each were occupied. CJ was about to turn his attention to them when he saw the golden seal all the thrones overlooked. The insignia etched into the floor beneath the thrones was one he recognized. CJ very nearly lost his footing as he caught sight of it, unable to pull his eyes away. Trevor even reached out to catch him before CJ righted himself, but he couldn't bring himself to take another step, let alone the several that would carry him before the elders. The coat of arms before him was a capital G with a double-edged sword stabbed downward through the middle. It was the same insignia from the mysterious note in his locker. His breath caught for a long moment, trying to make heads or tails of what he saw. The note, the one that was apparently blank, shared the same insignia as these elders. Did that mean they wrote the note? Perhaps he could ask them. When he finally looked up, he found 11 pairs of judgmental eyes staring him down. Or maybe not. Trevor was in step beside him, and CJ was vaguely aware of the hand he kept at the ready. He thinks we're going to stumble again. He might be right. CJ's strength was returning by the minute, but even that seemed scarce enough for him to stay upright, even with the crutch. Each step threatened to send him sprawling, which is why he was so thankful when his foot found the center of the giant seal. The thrones were almost surrounding him by this point, so he had to turn a little to see the elders at the ring's edge. But every gaze he met, he found they all shared the same quality that made him uneasy about Barthazal. They were weighing him. All of them were scrutinizing him, searching for something. Whether or not they found it, he didn't know. Each of the faces looking down on him from the thrones also shared the sense of agelessness. If he had to guess, the oldest person there couldn't be beyond their 80s, and the youngest might have been 50, if only for a brief moment before they too looked well beyond that in years. Each of the elders were robed in the white coats with gold trim that Barthazal had worn the day before. He was seated slightly off to CJ's side, third from the middle of the half circle. CJ tried to look them in the eye as Trevor had instructed, but shifted away when the glowing outlines came into focus. There came an unhappy grunt from beside CJ, which is when he learned that Trevor was kneeling next to him. He was down on one knee, arm resting on the upright one. CJ glanced at his crutch. Could he kneel? Would he be able to stand back up if he did? I have to get home. The notion was what spurred him on as he began trying to lower himself to mirror Trevor's posture. There's no need to stress yourself, lad, Barthazal said, earning a glare from the elder at the ring's center. Standing is just as well, if you can continue to manage it. CJ nodded gratefully, leaning more heavily on the cane. Trevor waited until he was told he could stand again. Cadet Captain Duralin, you can confirm that this is the child you brought from Outcast? The elder who had glared asked. His voice had a sense of age to it, but it wasn't hoarse or weak like CJ would have expected. The speaker's green eyes remained on CJ, practically boring into his soul. The white hair atop his head was thinning. That, combined with his lack of wrinkles, almost made it look like the guy was a middle-aged dad who dyed his hair. That's probably one of the comments I should keep to myself. He is, Elder, Trevor replied. The formal tone he adopted sounded even more pompous than how he'd talked in front of Barthazal yesterday. Hopefully, CJ wasn't expected to talk like that. He doubted whether or not he'd succeed while keeping a straight face. What is your name, child? The spokesman asked. The voice didn't share the grandfatherly tone Barthazal had. His eyes, as well as everyone else's, now rested on CJ. What were they looking for? Was it a bad thing if they found it? He did his best to steady his breathing and look the man in the eyes as he was instructed. A pale, purple-gray outline sharpened around him, but CJ forced himself not to look away. Connor Jason Blake, sir, he said, wishing his voice was steadier. The main elder stared down at him, then shifted his gaze over to one of the others. The woman he turned to looked kind of like one of CJ's teachers from elementary school. But even though she had the same graying brown hair, blue eyes, and no-nonsense demeanor, CJ doubted if Mrs. Patterson would look so fitting on a throne like that. Well, Gloria? He asked expectantly. Unlike everyone else in the room, Gloria had her eyes closed now. She stretched out a hand bathed in mint-green light, fingers spreading wide towards CJ. Suddenly, the vibrant, almost neon-green outline around her writhed, producing tendrils of light that seemed to slither towards CJ. He watched their approach and did his best to stand his ground as they reached him. The woman's face scrunched up, her lip curling in a scowl. The boy believes his words are genuine, Calrus. If he is deceiving us, it is because he himself is deceived. But there's something else about him. Something familiar. I cannot place it, she said finally, opening her eyes to inspect him again. But CJ was still focused on her words. He himself is deceived? She was suggesting that he didn't know who he was. The thought made him angry, but he wrestled to keep it from showing on his face. The spokesman leaned forward on his throne, eyes narrowing. And who is your father, boy? CJ opened his mouth to speak, but then bit his lip. Based on what Dia had told him, it was clear now why they wanted to know. Here, Blake was apparently an important name. They wanted to know if he was part of that family, or if the names were merely a coincidence. Still, that lingering sense of unease gave him pause. Finally, he broke the silence. Mitchell Allen Blake, he said, surprised that the anger he felt seeping into his bones wasn't present in the words. But as soon as he'd fallen silent, a hushed murmur broke out around the room. Everyone on the thrones seemed to be caught between two reactions. Half of them, including the spokesman, were glaring down at him. Their eyes read either suspicion or outright accusation. The other half had their eyes wide in surprise. Then contemplation fell across their expressions as they weighed his words. Even Trevor was giving him a sideways glance as if he were trying to make heads or tails of what CJ had said. That's enough, the lead elder said, cutting the chatter short. Duralin, you are dismissed to the hallway. Remain there until you are instructed to return. Yes, sir, Trevor replied as he gave a slight bow and headed towards the door. CJ was surprised to find that he wished the man would stay. It felt less intimidating to stare down these people when he had someone beside him, even if that person was Trevor. But the soldier was already to the double doors, which the guards opened from the other side as he approached. An eerie quiet abruptly appeared, as it seemed all the elders were waiting for Trevor's exit before they continued the discussion. As soon as the door shut behind him, the murmuring returned twice as strong as before. Another word from Kellers, the spokesperson, though, and all fell silent. He turned his attention to Gloria, an expectant expression on his face. Same as before, she told him. The boy truly believes that Mitchell is his father. He was, CJ blurted before he could stop himself. And this time, anger was definitely present in the words. None of the people on the throne seemed to even hear him, though, and they'd stopped stealing glances at him altogether.
If he truly is a Blake, that would explain why Vidal's third-in-command was attacking a school and outcast,
Barthazal said. That comment sent up another wave of murmurs.
There are other explanations, ones that are less far-fetched,
Another elder replied.
I cannot be the only one who finds it ridiculous to think that Vidal was aware of a Blake we were not. Members of the council, the attack can be discussed later. For now, we have other pressing matters,
Kellerus said, claiming control over the conversation again before he turns his attention to Barthazal.
You inspected the boy. What do you make of him?
Barthazal shook his head slightly, standing to address the others.
He is human, that I can say for certain, and his Alcra reeks of outcast. I have not felt such a strong taint on one's magical essence in quite some time. It is clear that he has never set foot in this world before now.
Barthazal turned towards CJ, and an expression of intrigue flashed across his face. The old man began to follow his gaze, stepping down from the throne and strolling toward him. The elder got nearly within arm's reach before he stretched out a hand and closed his eyes. CJ fought the urge to retreat as orange tendrils emanated from the man's outline and drifted in his direction.
Something is peculiar, though, Barthazal said. When he first arrived, I caught a hint of something. It felt older than the rest of him. Yet somehow it is woven into his very being. I've never sensed anything like it.
That can be puzzled out later, Kellerus said, his tone growing impatient. Any and all oddities must be set aside until we know for certain who or what he is. What he is? CJ thought angrily. The comment sent another hum of murmurs cascading across the thrones. Barthazal scowled thoughtfully as he returned to his own. Gloria was back to having her eyes closed, and tendrils once again reached for him. Most of the other elders kept switching their focus from Kellerus to CJ and back again, waiting for the spokesman to lead them in some kind of discussion. The seconds turned to minutes, with the only sound being the whispers that traveled from one elder to the next. A word was discernible here and there, but the conclusions they came to were surely beyond him. Every time one of them stole another glance his direction, he could feel his anger bubbling that much closer to the surface. When their eyes passed over him, they didn't see a person. They saw a vault, trying to keep the truth just out of reach. A lock to be opened. At least half of them looked at him like nothing more than a mere object. And those who didn't... CJ wasn't sure exactly what he detected. The eyes that scrutinized him looked as though they were inspecting a predatory animal on the loose. Not that any of them looked scared of him, just wary.
Barthazal?
It was one of the 3 women elders who turned to him.
Are you sure you sense no disturbance in him? You're sure he's human?
CJ bit his tongue to keep his response in mind. Of course I'm human, you wrinkly old hag. The fact that they didn't believe anything he said was frustrating enough, but to suggest he wasn't even a person? He fought to keep his expression calm. He didn't need them to believe him, he just needed them to send him home.
If he's anything other than human, it is so deeply hidden that I cannot discern it, Barthazal said evenly.
The elder's orange glow produced those weird, almost tentacles of light again. They seemed to go taut as they pierced CJ once more.
It'd have to be buried even deeper than the other oddity I sense.
His comment erupted another round of murmurs, but CJ barely heard. He kept his gaze fixed on the orange tendrils that stuck to him. The odd sight seemed to accompany every time the elders sensed something about him. It was like he was hallucinating something from them coming to dig around in his head. The thought made him stagger a step backwards, though it did no good to escape the orange apparitions.
Will you knock that off? CJ
thought irritably. He didn't even realize he'd spoken the words aloud until the glow receded back towards its source. The elder was on his feet again, fixing CJ with a puzzled expression.
You sensed my prying, Barthazal mused. Usually it takes months or more of practice to feel another searching your Alcra. Odd. I didn't feel any aptitude for such things.
CJ cocked his head to one side. You said that word before. Alcra. What does it mean? The elder chuckled.
I'm afraid it's a bit too late to play dumb, my boy. You seem to have tipped your hand, as it were.
CJ wished that for once these people would speak English. He scanned the faces of the Senior Citizens Club, finding that only Barthazal's held any amusement. Everyone else was staring at him twice as hard now, twice as suspicious. He felt like he'd said something he shouldn't have, though he had no idea what. Elder, CJ said, using the meekest, most innocent voice he could manage.
I don't know what you mean.
The neon tendrils from Gloria were still attached to his person as he spoke, but as the words escaped his mouth, she pursed her lips.
From what I can feel, the boy is being genuine. He has no idea what an Alcra is.
CJ hoped that would lay any suspicions to rest, but judging by their faces, it done quite the opposite. Words were quickly uttered from one throne to the next, though all 11 pairs of eyes remained on him. When they fell silent, Barthazal nodded at CJ.
My boy, it is quite clear the toxin from the attack still inhibits your movements. We're going to have Trevor take you back to your room for more rest. We can continue this conversation after your strength has returned to you in full.
But what about me going home? CJ blurted before he could stop himself.
Good job, idiot.
But instead of the glares or reprimand he was expecting, Barthazal smiled apologetically.
Though you seem to be better now than when you were first brought in, it is not uncommon for harsh side effects to persist long thereafter. If we send you back to Outcast now, you likely won't last the day. If you are in Gethrol, at least menders can be close at hand. Now, I suggest you go back and get your rest. Captain de Rollin.
As if hearing his name had summoned him, the double doors opened to reveal the soldier's entrance. But CJ was too wrapped up in the elder's words to notice much. The sudden shift in tone gave him whiplash. The elder's collective gaze somehow seemed a mixture of curiosity and indifference. What changed? He was given no opportunity to ask, as Trevor grabbed his free arm and started tugging him toward the exit. CJ was forced to shift his attention to staying upright. But as he risked a glance over his shoulder at the closing doors, he saw that accusative glare resurface on more than one face.